Desert night drive. You know, there's something about the moon that can turn an endless highway into a scene from a horror movie. It was just me, my car, and the crunch of gravel echoing off cliffs I couldn't see. I tell you, even with the heat still clinging to the night air, I felt this chill running down my spine. And it wasn't because I was in the middle of nowhere. My GPS had given up on me hours ago, just static where there should have been directions. The old map I'd dug out from my glove box might as well have been in hieroglyphs for all the good it did me. So yeah, I was lost, not your everyday kind of lost, but really, really lost. I should have listened to those locals who warned against taking this shortcut. But who wouldn't want to cut a few hours off a cross-country trip? Now, though, all I could think about was how much of a mistake that had been. The view hadn't changed for miles. Scrub brush, sand dunes, and dead Joshua trees as far as the eye could see. Even cranking up the AC didn't help with the heat inside my car. My eyes kept scanning for anything that suggested life. Then there was this flicker in the distance. So brief it could have been my imagination playing tricks on me due to fatigue, or maybe even moonlight messing with my vision. But then it happened again. No mistaking it this time. There was someone standing by the side of the road, tall and thin like one of those desert rocks shaped by wind and time into something almost human-looking. Suddenly I wasn't alone out here. I thought about hitting the gas pedal instead, but then remembered those stories about drifters in these parts. Still, driving further into God knows where seemed worse than stopping for some stranger. So with a sigh that sounded too loud in the silence, I pulled over. As I got closer, I could smell something foul, like spoiled meat with a hint of something else, something old and wrong. My hand automatically went for the pepper spray in my pocket. I exited my car to stretch my legs and breathe a bit of night air to clear my head. "Can I help you?" was all I managed to get out before my voice gave up on me. The figure turned toward me then, moonlight glinting off what looked like a skull beneath its hood. But as it stepped into the light, I saw it was more than that. Skin stretched tight over bones and eyes that didn't seem alive at all. Before I could react, this thing lunged at me. We struggled, my pepper spray slipping from my grip in the chaos. Then suddenly it stopped, like it heard something only it could hear. That's when this low rumble started up and the ground started shaking under us. And then out of nowhere came this creature straight from your worst nightmare. A centipede, but bigger than anything you can imagine, slithered out of the darkness with glowing red eyes that seemed to lock onto me for a moment that felt way too long. The figure bowed to this monstrosity before letting out a scream that shattered the night's silence. Then, just like that, it turned around and disappeared back into the darkness where it came from. I stood there frozen as this thing in front of me gave me what looked like a smile, stretching across its skeletal face, showing off teeth sharp as needles. "Welcome," it said in a voice that sounded like sandpaper scraping against metal. "Welcome to the hunting grounds." And let me tell you, no feeling compares to the kind of fear that hit me then. Pure instinct had me running back to my car faster than I'd ever moved before. The car door was as stubborn as a mule, refusing to let me in. My fingers slipped on the ice-cold handle, slick with the cold sweat of pure terror. The thing tilted its skull-like head again, and I swear I saw amusement in its hollow sockets. A scream ripped out of me as I lunged for the passenger door, my only shot at safety. It opened and I tumbled inside like a ragdoll, slamming it shut behind me. In panic mode, my fingers fumbled for the keys. The engine rumbled beneath me like an impatient beast ready to bolt. "Wait!" A voice rasped through the growl of anticipation from under the hood, but there was no way I was waiting around. I jammed the car into gear, stomping down on the accelerator. For a moment, my tires spun aimlessly before they found purchase on the gravel. I didn't dare look back. Those images, skeletal fiend and monstrous insect, were burned into my brain already. Each bump in the road, every weird light in the rearview mirror sent fresh waves of dread washing over me. The highway turned into a streaky blur as I pushed my car to its limits. Its engine cried out against such abuse. Yet despite this mad dash for escape, there seemed to be nothing but desert stretching out ahead, an endless wasteland designed by some twisted god. Just when hope was about to jump ship completely, salvation appeared. A gas station. Hope bloomed within me, weak but real nonetheless. Maybe there was still a chance for rescue, or at least escape from this nightmare of a place. My brakes screamed their complaints as I slid to a halt before this beacon of potential refuge. It looked old and desolate, windows boarded up and paint peeling away, Yet it seemed promising amidst all that desert desolation. Jumping out of the car, adrenaline overpowered any hunger I felt. The gas station door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I reached for my phone, but it was dead, naturally. I'd left my pepper spray behind, not exactly a weapon to fight off nightmare creatures, but it would have been better than having nothing. Stepping into the gloom was like walking into a wall of stench decay, and something sulphurous hit me hard. My eyes strained to make sense of the shifting shapes. A rustle from behind sent my heart racing. I crouched low and moved forward. Then I saw it, a figure wrapped in rags huddled in the corner. Relief washed over me momentarily. Maybe another survivor. "Hello?" My voice echoed back at me, bouncing off empty shelves and dusty walls. The figure stirred slowly, raising its head to reveal a face bathed in moonlight, thin and pale but undoubtedly human. My relief didn't last long, though. His eyes were devoid of any spark of life, reflecting instead the desolate landscape outside. His voice was raspy as he spoke, sending chills down my spine. "Welcome," he croaked out. "Welcome to Purgatory." Suddenly the ground shook beneath me. A distant rumble echoed ominously across the barren lands. It hit me then that this desert wasn't just preying on lost souls. It was herding them, leading them to some grotesque feast where I was now set to be the star attraction. With a scream that shattered the silence, I turned tail and ran deeper into the shadows within this forsaken refuge. Maybe there would be no escape after all, but I refused to go willingly into whatever horror awaited outside. The rumbling grew louder and closer. Escape seemed like a pipe dream now, but one thing was clear. The desert held dark secrets buried beneath its sands, waiting for the next unlucky soul who dared to venture off the beaten path. Terror Motel. You know that moment when you're driving on a deserted highway, and the only thing breaking up the monotony is a flickering neon sign in the distance? Well, that was us. Me gripping the steering wheel like my life depended on it, knuckles white as a ghost, and Mark grumbling beside me. The Sunway Motel sign looked more like an obituary than an invitation. The place was straight out of a horror movie, weather-beaten bungalows standing stoically under the heavy silence. A vacancy sign blinked weakly from behind a boarded-up window like some desperate cry for help. The fear was creeping in, but exhaustion won over. We'd been circling these godforsaken backroads for hours thanks to one lousy detour. I swear there was this metallic smell hanging in the air that made my skin crawl. The motel office was eerily empty, with dust and decay being its only occupants. There was this key hanging from a rusty hook behind the counter, which felt more threatening than welcoming. Our room? It was worse than we'd imagined. Peeling wallpaper revealing years of neglect and stained sheets whispering secrets we didn't want to hear. I locked our flimsy door, its click echoing ominously in stale air heavy with forgotten memories. While Mark complained about lukewarm water in the shower, I found myself staring into the darkness outside. Then came this rustling sound from some overgrown bushes nearby, and out staggered this figure, humanoid but all twisted and distorted. Its skin hung loosely over skeletal bones, and those milky eyes, they stared at me with such intensity that it froze my blood solid. I tried to scream, but fear had other plans. I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp instead. Mark came rushing out of his shower, demanding answers. I pointed toward the window, but by then, whatever it was had vanished into thin air. It must have been just a stray dog. Mark tried to brush it off, wrapping me in his warmth against the creeping chill. The rest of the night was a blur of howling wind and creaking floorboards. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Then came this loud thud around 3 a.m. that jolted me awake. Mark was gone, and all that remained was this suffocating dread filling every nook and cranny. I found him in the bathroom, sprawled on cold tiles with his body twisted into something out of a nightmare. His skin had turned this sickening grayish-green and stretched tight over protruding bones. His eyes were vacant, staring at nothingness with an expression frozen in sheer terror. And there it was, feasting off Mark, that thing from earlier, not some stray dog after all. It locked its gaze onto mine before rising to its feet with an eerie grace. Escape? Wishful thinking. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I grabbed a vase from the nightstand and swung it with all my might when it lunged at me. The sound of shattering bone bought me enough time to run. I ran like hell through those hallways, heart pounding like a wild drum in my chest, trying to find an exit. Every dead end sent waves of panic washing over me until I made it back to the deserted office where Hope hung, that rusty key behind the counter. Just as I flung open the door to freedom, icy skeletal hands grabbed me from behind, silencing any screams while darkness swallowed me, leaving only rhythmic thudding sounds resonating inside. You know, the first light of dawn had a way of sneaking in through those busted windows. It lit up this lone tire track etched into the gravel driveway. Inside, though, it was a different story. Mark was there, sprawled out all lifeless-like on the bathroom floor. Looked like he was sleeping if you ignored the pool of red around him. I found myself cornered, with no option but to fade into the shadows. It was a fate I had not chosen, but one that had been thrust upon me. I had become one of them, a grotesque aberration, a creature that would make even the bravest hearts recoil in horror. Mark, he was gone, the only soul who ever dared to love me in my entirety. He cherished every part of me, the good and the bad, my eccentricities and imperfections. His absence left an echoing void in my heart that nothing could fill. The world seemed darker without him. His laughter no longer filled the air, his smile no longer warmed my days. I was alone with my monstrous self, hidden from sight for fear of what others might see. You know how time flies, right? One day rolls into the next, and before you know it, weeks have passed. That's exactly what happened in our town. People moved on and memory faded. The cops wrote it off as another case of young'uns running wild, and that put us smack dab in the media spotlight with our little Sunway Motel. It turned into a ghost town of sorts, with its vacant rooms and tired old sign. But you know what they say about life having a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them? Just like that, out of nowhere, an unexpected friend stepped up from the crowd, someone who could see past my monstrous looks and recognize the person underneath. Now don't get me wrong, this friend was no Mark. He was irreplaceable. But this new buddy offered something unique, acceptance and understanding in a world where I was seen as a freak show. This new phase? It was so vivid I could almost touch it. Each moment etched into reality itself. This wasn't just some tale. It was my life taking shape under the most unusual circumstances. And as for the Sunway Motel, well, it just sat there looking all deserted-like, unneeded like an old lighthouse nobody sails by anymore. It became a chilling monument to horrors swallowed up by time. Inside those decaying walls, things were stirring in the shadows behind those boarded-up windows, things barely human anymore, driven by an insatiable hunger. Every now and then, if you listened closely when the wind blew just right, you could catch a chilling reminder of the terror that had unfolded there, and a whispering voice saying, "Welcome. Home." A taste of terror. Paris was draped in a shroud of fog, obscuring Montmartre's labyrinthine lanes and secret passages. Nestled within this spectral haze, Lur Noir throbbed with a perverse vitality that magnetized those craving a brush with the grotesque. Commanding this haven of horror was Chef Beaumont, an artist of flesh and flame, his gaze reflecting unfathomable mysteries and knowledge of arcane rites. The jaded Parisian aristocracy, allured by hushed tales and whispers, were drawn to Lur Noir, not for nourishment, but for an adrenaline-infused thrill. Each dish Beaumont conjured was an opulent spectacle, a feast for the eyes as much as it was tantalizing to the palate. From escargot bathed in lunar light to delicacies imbued with hushed yearnings and fractured memories, every morsel at Lur Noir promised an indelible encounter. The coq au vin, steeped in a lush nightshade sauce, suggested visions pirouetting just beyond sanity's threshold. When Monsieur Dupont met his end on a moonless night in hideous spasms of pain, his once debonair features contorted into a silent scream. The whispers climaxed into hysteria among Lur Noir's intrigued clientele. Yet despite these ominous signs, the patrons were lured back to the grim establishment like moths to a flame. Clara, an intrepid journalist with an instinct for scandal and peril, stepped inside Lur Noir only to be welcomed by Beaumont's disarming grin. He presented her with a tasting menu culled from nightmares. Each mouthful sent her taste buds spiraling through flavors that teetered on madness. Yet, amidst this culinary experience, Clara detected something amiss. A sickening sweetness veiled beneath the refined facade that set off warning bells in her mind. That night, Clara was tormented by disquieting dreams. She was back at Lur Noir, but now it was a vicious realm swallowed by shadows. Beaumont stood behind the kitchen counter, his face warped into a deranged smile as he prepared dishes that seemed to pulse with alien energy. Driven to uncover the truth about Lur Noir, Clara immersed herself in ancient texts believed to guard age-old secrets. She unearthed that Lur Noir was more than just a restaurant. It was an altar where Beaumont sacrificed human souls to a gluttonous entity lurking in the shadows. Armed with this forbidden knowledge, she returned to Lur Noir, not as an intrigued patron, but as a challenger. She demanded the plat du diable, a dish rumored to be Satan's nectar. As Beaumont smirked and handed her a silver cloche, Clara knew she might gamble everything for this enigmatic dish. With hands quivering in anticipation and fear, she lifted the lid, revealing not an extravagant delicacy, but a squirming abyss of darkness reaching out for her. Terror surged within her like an icy wave crashing against her resolve. But Clara wouldn't yield. Gritting her teeth and narrowing her eyes with determination, she plunged her spoon into the void and took a bite. The first taste was akin to swallowing molten rock. Pain seared every cell of her body and twisted visions of unspeakable horrors flashed before her eyes. But as terror threatened to engulf her, something within Clara shifted. She harnessed that fear and let out a guttural scream that shattered glassware and silenced the laughter throughout the restaurant. Her defiance, however, was fleeting, for the darkness inside grew stronger, feeding off her fear until it devoured her whole. As she let out a final strangled sob, Clara realized the horrifying truth. She was yet another feast for the entity that lurked in the shadows. Beaumont's eyes were cold and calculating as he observed Clara's descent into the shadows. But he didn't see defeat in her empty gaze. Instead, he saw a burning desire for control and authority over others. This was his masterpiece, a chef molded by fear, whose every culinary creation contained a hint of darkness. Lur Noir loomed ominously over Paris, a testament to its twisted chef's brilliance. The whispers of the restaurant's sinister reputation echoed throughout the city, enticing unsuspecting patrons with promises of forbidden pleasures. And as they crossed its threshold, lured by their morbid curiosity, they remained blissfully unaware of the impending darkness that awaited them. The night janitor's daughter. Growing up, I'd always been aware of my father's nocturnal work schedule. His job as a night janitor at the local university consumed most of his waking hours. But what I hadn't anticipated was that his work extended far beyond just sweeping floors and emptying trash cans. The truth unveiled itself in stages, each one more chilling than the last. The first hint was an earring I found in my father's coat pocket while doing laundry. It wasn't mine. It wasn't even gold like the ones I wore. Instead, it was a cheap trinket made of silver, tarnished and dull. Then there was this unusual fragrance clinging to his clothes, sharp and floral, yet somehow familiar. It wasn't just on his clothes, though. It seemed to permeate every fiber of his being, and it left me feeling uneasy. But the final piece fell into place when I stumbled upon an old newspaper clipping tucked away in a dusty corner of our attic. A grainy photo of a woman bearing an uncanny resemblance to myself stared back at me from beneath the headline, "Missing." My heart pounded against my ribcage like a trapped bird as the earth beneath my feet seemed to shift abruptly. My father, who had always been loving albeit distant, suddenly became an enigma wrapped in mystery. All these unexplained late nights at work suddenly made sense. The unsuspected disappearances of local women no longer seemed like random occurrences, but rather pieces of a horrifying puzzle falling into place. A cold dread seized me by the throat as realization dawned on me. I couldn't ignore it or pretend I hadn't seen that haunting photo or smelled that blood-tinged perfume anymore. But confronting him would be akin to standing on the edge of an abyss and willingly throwing myself into the darkness. Days melded into one another, forming an unsettling dance between suspicion and denial. In a desperate attempt to provoke a reaction, I started leaving subtle hints around. Flyers of missing women casually left on the fridge, news reports about serial killers strategically turned to face him. His eyes grew colder with each passing day, the forced smile on his lips thinning. One night he was late again. The house echoed with an eerie silence that seemed to amplify my growing fear. Propelled by a terrifying curiosity, I ventured into the basement, a place I hadn't visited in years. It smelled faintly of bleach and something more sinister, something that made my stomach churn. Flicking on the dim light revealed a chilling sight. A makeshift altar stood at the far end of the room, illuminated by a single candle's glow. Lying atop it was a woman whose hair matched the fiery red hue of the woman in the photo from the attic. Her lifeless eyes stared up at me accusingly as if mirroring my own horror. The sound of footsteps startled me, and I spun around to see my father emerging from the shadows, his face devoid of any emotion. "So you finally figured it out," he said in an eerily calm voice that lacked any hint of remorse or guilt. The next few moments were a blur as adrenaline coursed through me like wildfire. I lunged for a poker lying nearby and ran blindly through our home, driven by a pure instinct to survive. He caught up with me at the staircase. His grip tightened around my arm like iron shackles. We struggled but abruptly tumbled down together. When I came to, pain shot through my ankle, and my blurry vision revealed my father's motionless body at the bottom of the stairs, surrounded by an expanding pool of blood. Soon after, blaring sirens shattered the peacefulness of our usually quiet neighborhood, offering not just assistance but also a chance to escape this never-ending nightmare. The trial that followed was nothing short of a media circus. The revelation about the quiet janitor's monstrous secret sent shockwaves through our community. I moved away after recovering from my physical and emotional wounds, his heinous crimes casting a long shadow over my life. Years later, on an Easter Sunday, I found myself in a park watching children gleefully hunting for brightly colored eggs under the warm sunshine. A silver earring glinting in the sunlight caught my eye. It was identical to the one I had found years ago in my father's coat pocket. My heart pounded in my chest as I picked it up, only to find an inscription on its back: "To my beloved daughter." A cold chill ran down my spine as realization dawned upon me. There were 2 earrings originally, and now I held both in my hands. A terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if there was more than one monster hiding behind the facade of an ordinary janitor? Abruptly, the innocent peals of laughter morphed into blood-curdling shrieks as children scattered in a frenzy. Their small fingers trembled as they pointed toward a figure that had materialized from the shadows of the undergrowth. He clutched a mop in his gnarled hands, and the all-too-familiar sight sent shivers of fear down my spine. Trapped in the jungle's embrace, what had once been an exhilarating journey through the dense, humid labyrinth of the Amazon rainforest, alongside my friends, now felt like a stifling dungeon. Its walls and bars were composed of relentless emerald foliage that seemed to choke out any hope of escape. Our audacious decision to navigate this boundless wilderness had led us astray, ensnaring us in a never-ending maze woven from lush, vibrant life. Days blurred into a single monotonous period, their individuality devoured by the all-encompassing jungle. The chorus of exotic birds and unseen insects that had initially captivated us now reverberated around us as a cruel taunt, a twisted parody of our predicament. Hunger was our constant tormentor, gnawing at our insides with animalistic ferocity, while fear coiled around our hearts like a deadly anaconda preparing for its lethal strike. We stumbled upon an unnerving clearing as the sun sank beneath the horizon, obscured by towering canopies, casting spectral shadows on our path. It was eerily silent compared to the constant hum of life surrounding it. At its heart stood an ancient altar covered in moss that radiated both a magnetic and unsettling aura. The obsidian stone was etched with grotesque figures, seemingly trapped in eternal agony. "What is this?" I murmured to myself. I was the group's self-appointed historian, but I'd never seen anything like this before. As we tiptoed closer, a low moan echoed across the clearing. It was followed by another sound, then more, until it seemed as if the jungle itself was screaming out in shared suffering. Panic seized us. We frantically rummaged through our backpacks as our flashlights illuminated a horrifying sight: figures shuffling towards us. Their clothes were tattered remnants clinging onto their pallid, decaying bodies, their eyes hollow pits of emptiness. These weren't your typical bedtime story zombies, but something far more terrifying, birthed from ancient secrets buried deep within this forest. With shocking speed, they lunged at us, their chilling moans morphing into guttural growls. Pandemonium erupted. Liam, who had always been our courageous leader, stumbled over a jutting root, and his scream ricocheted around us as they descended on him like vultures on a fresh carcass. We scattered, adrenaline fueling our movements as primal survival instincts took control. I managed to scramble up the towering trunk of a kapok tree, ignoring the rough bark scraping against my skin. From my elevated perch, I watched in petrified horror as my friends were devoured by the ravenous creatures, their screams piercing through the merciless jungle. Time lost all relevance as I sat there amidst the terrifying cacophony of moaning and flesh being torn apart. Clinging to hope like a lifeline, I watched as a single decaying figure emerged from the carnage below and headed toward my tree, its vacant eyes locked on me. Tears streamed down my face as I realized there was no escape. As the fiend started its ascent up the trunk, I grabbed a loose branch above me and snapped it off in desperation. With one last prayer whispered into the night air, I swung at its head. The impact was sickening, but did nothing to deter it. Instead, it let out a deafening shriek that filled the entire clearing. The shriek wasn't for me. It was a call, drawing more of them from deep in the forest heartland. They flooded the clearing with what seemed like thousands, drawn by that final cry. Paralyzed with fear, I could only watch as they turned toward me. The uncanny glow of torches lit the way as one figure, larger than the rest, emerged adorned with grim jewelry made from human bones. It was their king overseeing the gruesome feast. Its voice boomed through the space, sending a fresh wave of chills down my spine. "Welcome, sacrifice," it rasped. "You have awakened us. Now join our eternal feast." The shriek that tore from my throat was a raw, guttural gasp, bouncing off the canopy of trees as I tumbled from the branch I'd been clinging to. The impact with the forest floor was jarring, every nerve ending in my body screaming out in agony. Dazed and disoriented, I scrambled blindly at the leaf-littered ground, seeking something solid to anchor myself to. But all I found was a chilling sense of dread. The cruel laughter of the king resounded through the undergrowth, a haunting reminder of my vulnerability. With adrenaline pumping through my veins like liquid fire, I forced myself up onto shaky legs and staggered forward. But between the pulsing pain in my temple and the sharp sting of what felt like a deep gash in my calf, the movement was torturous. My desperate flight felt more like a stumble toward an inevitable end, rather than an escape attempt. The jungle pressed in on me from all sides, its dense underbrush forming an intricate maze filled with unseen threats. Roots twisted up from beneath layers of fallen leaves to trip me, while vines hung low from branches overhead, striking me with their thorny lengths as they swung back and forth. The symphony of sounds in this tropical nightmare changed its tune to one more ominous. It wasn't just nocturnal creatures stirring anymore, but also the eerie echoes of those pursuing me. Their growls were low and guttural, sounds no living creature should make. My shirt barely clung to my frame after being ripped by brambles and thorns. My sweat-soaked skin exposed to whatever else lurked in the shadows. Fear nipped at my heels like a rabid animal as I pushed through thickets and ferns that seemed hell-bent on holding me back. The once vibrant rainforest no longer felt like a sanctuary teeming with life. The putrid stench of decay replaced the sweet fragrance of blooming orchids. As I broke through the dense foliage, my feet stumbled onto the rocky bank of a raging river. The water roared and crashed against the jagged boulders, carving its way through the unforgiving wilderness. I scanned the treacherous currents for any hint of a safe passage. I knew I didn't have the strength to fight against the currents, but it was my only chance at escaping this hellhole. Just as I was about to make my move toward the water, an icy grip closed around my ankle. I fell forward, my skin scraping against rough pebbles. Twisting around, the moonlight illuminated the grotesque face of one of them. Its skeletal fingers tightened their hold on me as it pulled me closer to its gaping maw. My hands clawed at the rocky ground for something, anything, that could serve as a weapon but came up empty. The pain that followed its first bite was indescribable. Every nerve in my body was set ablaze while darkness crept in from the edges of my vision. As life slipped away from me, a horrifying thought took root. Death wasn't just about dying, it meant becoming one of them. My spirit wouldn't find peace or oblivion but would remain within the trees and vines of this cursed place, another piece in a twisted puzzle of damnation. There would be no solitude here, only an endless cycle of souls led to their inevitable fate. The thought sent ice-cold fear coursing through me even as the warm blood drained from my wounds. Genuine terror lay not merely in the act of perishing, but in the chilling, unfathomable mysteries that lurk beyond the veil of death. And death wasn't an end. It was simply a new beginning, an eternal nightmare from which there is no waking up.